The December wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows of the small house where Foster Williams had spent the last 3 years trying to convince himself that family meant forgiveness, that love could outlast disappointment. But tonight, as sleet battered the porch and the sky turned the color of bruised steel, Foster stood in the living room with his battered duffel bag at his feet, his daughter's words slicing through him like the cold. "You're just taking up space here, old man. Get lost." Her voice was flat, her eyes hard, and for a moment Foster wondered if this was really his little girl, the one he'd carried on his shoulders, the one he'd taught to ride a bike, the one he'd comforted through every heartbreak. But the woman in front of him was a stranger, her jaw set, her arms folded, her gaze fixed on the door as if she couldn't wait for him to disappear. He tried to reason with her, to remind her of all the times he'd been there, all the sacrifices he'd made, but she cut him off with a shake of her head. "I can't do this anymore. You're just in the way." The words echoed in the empty house as she turned and walked down the hall, the door to her room slamming shut behind her. Foster stood there for a long moment, the silence pressing in on him, before he picked up his bag and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit him like a slap, the wind tearing at his coat, the sleet stinging his face. He made his way to his old sedan, the only thing he had left, and climbed into the back seat, pulling a thin blanket over his shoulders. The car was freezing, the windows fogged with his breath, and as he lay there shivering, he wondered how it had come to this, how a lifetime of hard work and sacrifice could end in a parking lot, alone, with nothing but regret for company. If you enjoy powerful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Foster tried to sleep, but every sound outside made him flinch. The scrape of a snowplow, the laughter of teenagers passing by, the distant wail of a siren. He thought of calling someone, anyone, but his phone was dead, the charger left behind in his daughter's house. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but he had no appetite, only a dull ache that seemed to settle in his bones. As the hours dragged on, the storm grew worse, the car rocking in the wind, the world outside turning to ice. Foster pulled the blanket tighter, his mind replaying every argument, every missed opportunity, every moment he tried to make things right. He wondered if his daughter would even notice he was gone, if she'd feel a pang of guilt when she saw his empty room, or if she'd just be relieved to have the space back. The night stretched on, endless and merciless, and Foster felt himself slipping into a kind of numbness, a place where hope was just another word for pain. But just as he was about to drift off, a sharp knock on the window jolted him awake. He sat up, heart pounding, and saw a man standing outside, his breath clouding in the cold, a look of concern on his face. "You okay in there?" the man asked, his voice muffled by the glass. Foster hesitated, then rolled down the window a crack. "I'm fine," he lied, his voice hoarse. The man studied him for a moment, then nodded. "If you need anything, I'm parked over there. Name's Carter." Foster watched as the man walked away, his figure swallowed by the darkness. He lay back down, the encounter replaying in his mind, a tiny spark of hope flickering in the gloom. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as invisible as he felt. But as the storm raged on and the night grew colder, Foster knew that survival would take more than hope. It would take a miracle. And somewhere deep down he wondered if the worst was yet to come. The next morning, the storm had passed but left the world glazed in ice. the city transformed into a landscape of brittle beauty and hidden danger. Foster woke to the ache of cold in his bones, his breath fogging the windows of the car, his body stiff from a night spent curled on the back seat. He rubbed his hands together, trying to coax warmth into his fingers, and stared out at the empty parking lot, the world eerily quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. Hunger gnawed at him, sharper now, and he considered walking to the gas station for a cup of coffee and a stale pastry, but the thought of facing the world, of being seen as just another homeless old man, made him hesitate. He closed his eyes, trying to summon the strength to move, when a sharp tap on the window jolted him upright. It was the same man from the night before, Carter, but this time he looked different, more purposeful, his coat buttoned tight, a briefcase in one hand and a look of cautious hope in his eyes. Foster rolled down the window, the cold air biting at his face. "Morning," Carter said, his breath clouding in the chill. "Are you Foster Williams?" Foster blinked, suspicion warring with curiosity. "Yeah. Who's asking?" Carter glanced around, then leaned in, lowering his voice. "You've inherited $60 million. The words hung in the air, absurd and impossible, and for a moment Foster wondered if he was still dreaming, if the cold and hunger had finally broken his mind. "What did you say?" he managed, his voice barely more than a whisper. Carter smiled, a flash of genuine warmth. "I'm serious. I'm an attorney. Your great-uncle passed away last month. No other heirs. We've been searching for you for weeks. I tracked you down through a friend at the shelter." Foster stared at him, the world tilting beneath him. "This is a joke," he said, his voice shaking. "It has to be." Carter shook his head, pulling a thick envelope from his briefcase. "It's real. Here's the paperwork. There's a hotel room waiting for you, a hot meal and a shower. All you have to do is come with me." Foster's mind raced. Memories of his great-uncle, a distant figure from childhood, stories of old money and family feuds, the kind of legend you never expect to touch your own life. He looked at the envelope, at Carter's earnest face, and felt a surge of hope so fierce it almost hurt. But beneath the hope was fear. Fear that this was a scam, a trick, another humiliation waiting to happen. "Why me?" he asked, his voice raw. Carter shrugged. "Sometimes life gives you a second chance, Mr. Williams. Sometimes you just have to take it." Foster hesitated, the weight of the past pressing down on him. He thought of his daughter's words, the cold, the hunger, the endless nights of regret. He thought of the kindness of strangers, the brief moments of hope that had kept him going. And then, with a trembling hand, he opened the car door and stepped out into the morning light. The world felt new, dangerous, and full of possibility. As Carter led him to the waiting car, Foster glanced back at the old sedan, the place that had been his prison and his refuge. He knew that nothing would ever be the same. The worst had happened, but maybe, just maybe, the best was yet to come. The ride to the hotel was a blur, the city's icy streets flashing past the window as Carter drove with quiet confidence, occasionally glancing over to make sure Foster was still breathing, still believing. Foster sat in stunned silence, the envelope heavy in his lap, his mind racing with questions and doubts. The car's heater blasted warm air, thawing the chill that had settled in his bones, but it did nothing to ease the ache in his heart. He kept replaying Carter's words, $60 million, a great-uncle's legacy, a second chance. Wondering if this was all some elaborate trick, a cruel joke played on a desperate man. But when they pulled up to the hotel, a gleaming tower of glass and steel, and Carter handed his keys to the valet, Foster felt the first flicker of hope. The lobby was a world away from the back seat of his car. Marble floors, golden light, the scent of fresh flowers and expensive cologne. Carter checked him in with practiced efficiency, the staff treating Foster with a deference that made him feel both invisible and exposed. "Room 1802, Carter said, pressing a keycard into Foster's hand. "There's a hot meal waiting for you and a change of clothes. Take your time. I'll be back in the morning with the paperwork." Foster nodded, his throat too tight for words. He rode the elevator in silence, the numbers ticking upward, his reflection in the mirrored walls a stranger, unshaven, hollow-eyed, but alive. The room was warm and bright, the bed piled high with pillows, the bathroom stocked with soaps and towels so soft they felt like a dream. Foster stood under the steaming shower for what felt like hours, letting the water wash away the grime and shame of the past weeks. He dressed in the new clothes Carter had provided, simple, comfortable, but clean, and sat down to a meal that tasted like hope. For the first time in months, he slept in a real bed, the sheets cool and crisp against his skin, the city lights twinkling outside the window. When he woke, sunlight streamed through the curtains and for a moment he forgot where he was. Then he saw the envelope on the nightstand, the hotel breakfast on a silver tray, and remembered. He was no longer homeless, no longer invisible. He was Foster Williams, heir to a fortune he'd never expected, a man with a future as wide open as the sky. But as he sipped his coffee and stared out at the city, a new fear crept in. What would he do with this second chance? Could he trust Carter or anyone after all he'd been through? And what would happen when his daughter found out? Would she come running back, or would she try to take everything from him again? The question circled in his mind, sharper than the winter wind. He knew that money could buy comfort but not trust. And as he waited for Carter to return, Foster realized that the hardest part of his journey was just beginning. The world had changed overnight, but the wounds of betrayal and loneliness would take far longer to heal. Still, as he looked at his reflection in the window, older, yes, but not broken, he felt a spark of determination. He would not waste this chance. He would not let the past define him. And whatever came next, he would face it with the quiet strength of a man who had survived the storm. Foster had barely finished his breakfast when a sharp knock echoed through the hotel suite, jolting him from his thoughts. He hesitated, heart pounding, the memory of cold nights in his car and the echo of his daughter's last cruel words still fresh in his mind. He opened the door to find her standing there. Rachel, the daughter who had once been his world, now a stranger in a borrowed coat, her eyes rimmed red from crying or lack of sleep. For a moment neither of them spoke, the silence thick with everything that had gone unsaid. Rachel's gaze flicked past him, taking in the luxury of the suite, the untouched breakfast, the envelope on the table. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling, I heard about the money." Foster's jaw tightened, 1,000 responses fighting for space in his throat. He stepped aside, letting her in, watching as she moved through the room with a mix of awe and shame. "I'm sorry," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I was scared. I was angry. I didn't know what else to do. I never thought you'd actually leave." Foster studied her, searching for the little girl he'd once carried on his shoulders, the teenager who'd confided her dreams to him, the young woman who'd called him for advice on her first apartment. He saw flashes of all of them, but mostly he saw the woman who had turned him out into the cold, who had chosen comfort over compassion. "Why are you really here, Rachel?" he asked, his voice low. She flinched, tears welling in her eyes. "I lost my job. The bills are piling up. I made a mistake, Dad. I need your help." The words hung in the air, heavy and familiar. Foster felt a surge of anger, but also a deep, aching sadness. He wanted to forgive her, to believe that this was the beginning of something new, but the wounds were too fresh, the memory of the storm too raw. "You didn't want me when I had nothing," he said quietly. "Why should I trust you now?" Rachel sobbed, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "Because you're my father. Because I'm your daughter. Because I'm sorry." Foster sat beside her, the distance between them both physical and emotional. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but he held back, unsure if he was ready to let her in again. "I need time," he said finally. "I need to know that you're here for me, not for the money." Rachel nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'll prove it, Dad. I promise." As she left, Foster felt a strange mix of hope and dread. The reunion he'd dreamed of was nothing like he'd imagined. Messy, painful, unfinished. He knew that forgiveness would not come easily, that trust would have to be rebuilt brick by brick. But as he watched his daughter disappear down the hallway, he realized that the true test of family was not in the easy moments, but in the willingness to try again after everything had fallen apart. The storm had passed, but the work of healing had only just begun. The days that followed Rachel's visit were a strange blend of hope and suspicion, as if Foster's heart was caught between thawing and freezing all over again. He tried to settle into his new life, meeting with Carter and a team of advisors to set up accounts, sign documents, and learn the language of wealth that had always seemed to belong to someone else. The hotel staff treated him with deference, but Foster couldn't shake the feeling that he was still an outsider, a man playing a part in someone else's story. Rachel called every day, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to ask for help with a bill or a job lead. Foster listened, wanting to believe her remorse was real, but every request felt like a test. Every "I love you, Dad" tinged with the memory of that December night. He began to notice small things going missing from his suite: an expensive pen, a watch, a bottle of cologne. At first he thought he was just forgetful, but then the hotel manager called to say that someone had tried to use his name to access his safe deposit box. Foster's stomach dropped. He checked the security footage with Carter's help, and there, grainy but unmistakable, was Rachel, arguing with a hotel clerk, her face twisted with frustration as she tried to convince them she was just helping her father. The betrayal hit Foster like a punch. He confronted Rachel the next morning, his voice shaking with anger and heartbreak. "Why, Rachel? After everything, why would you do this?" She broke down, sobbing, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I was desperate, Dad. I thought if I could just get ahead, I could fix everything. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Foster felt the old ache return, the sense of being used, discarded, invisible. He realized that money had changed nothing. It had only revealed the cracks that had always been there. Carter stepped in, his tone firm but kind. "Mr. Williams, we can press charges or we can set boundaries. It's your choice." Foster looked at his daughter, her face streaked with tears, and felt a surge of sorrow and resolve. "You need help, Rachel. Real help. I'll pay for treatment, for counseling, but I can't let you hurt me again." She nodded, defeated, and left the suite without another word. That night, Foster sat alone by the window, the city lights glittering below, and wondered if forgiveness was possible, or if some wounds were meant to be carried, not healed. The betrayal had changed everything, but it had also set him free. He would not be a victim, not to the storm, not to his daughter, not to the past. The next chapter would be his to write on his own terms. The city was waking up to spring, but Foster Williams felt the chill of winter lingering in his bones as he tried to settle into a life that still felt borrowed. He spent his days meeting with Carter and the financial team, learning about trusts, investments, and the careful art of saying no to the endless stream of distant relatives and old acquaintances who suddenly remembered his name. Foster found solace in small routines. Morning walks in the park, coffee at the corner cafe, afternoons spent volunteering at a local shelter where no one cared about his bank balance. He was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could build something real from the ruins of his old life. Then one afternoon as he returned to the hotel, the concierge handed him a note. "A woman came by, said she knew you from years ago. She'll be at the Bluebird Cafe at 6. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the name at the bottom, Evelyn, sent a jolt through Foster's heart. Evelyn had been his first love, a memory from a life before marriage, before Rachel, before the world had grown so complicated. He hadn't seen her in 40 years. Curiosity and anxiety warred inside him as he made his way to the cafe, the city's noise fading into the background. Evelyn was waiting at a corner table, her hair silver but her eyes as sharp as ever. She smiled, and for a moment Foster felt young again. "I heard about your windfall," she said, her voice warm but edged with something urgent. "But that's not why I'm here." She slid a folder across the table. "I work with a foundation that helps people who've lost everything, people like you, before all this. But there's something you need to know. Your great-uncle's fortune. It wasn't just luck. He left it to you because he knew what you'd been through. He was watching Foster. He saw how your family treated you. He wanted you to have a second chance, but he also wanted you to use it wisely." Foster opened the folder, his hands trembling. Inside were letters, photographs, and a legal document, a codicil to the will, with a clause that could change everything. If Foster used the money for revenge or selfish gain, the inheritance would revert to charity. But if he used it to help others, to rebuild, to forgive, the fortune would remain his. Evelyn looked at him, her gaze steady. "You have a choice, Foster. You can let the past define you, or you can build something better." The words hit him harder than any storm. He realized that the true test wasn't surviving the cold or even forgiving Rachel. It was deciding what kind of man he wanted to be now that the world was watching. As he left the cafe, the city lights flickering on around him, Foster felt a new sense of purpose. The next chapter wouldn't be about money or revenge. It would be about redemption, about using his second chance to make a difference, not just for himself but for everyone who'd ever been left out in the cold. The days that followed Evelyn's visit were filled with a new kind of energy, as if the city itself was urging Foster to move forward, to do something meaningful with the fortune that had landed in his lap. He met with Carter and the Foundation's advisors, setting up scholarships for kids aging out of foster care, funding a new wing at the shelter, and quietly paying off the medical debts of strangers who would never know his name. Each act of kindness felt like a stone laid in the foundation of a new life, one built not on bitterness but on hope. Yet even as Foster found purpose in giving, the ache of Rachel's betrayal lingered. He hadn't heard from her in weeks, and part of him was grateful for the silence, the chance to heal without reopening old wounds. But one rainy afternoon as he returned to the hotel, he found her waiting in the lobby, her hair damp, her eyes red from crying. She stood as he approached, her hands twisting nervously. "Dad, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Foster hesitated, the memory of her last visit, her lies, her theft, still raw. But something in her face, a vulnerability he hadn't seen since she was a child, made him nod. They sat in a quiet corner, the city's noise muffled by the thick carpet and the steady drum of rain against the windows. Rachel took a deep breath, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need your help. I'm in trouble." She slid a folder across the table, her hands shaking. Inside were court documents, eviction notices, and a letter from a lawyer threatening to sue for unpaid debts. "I tried to fix things on my own, but I made it worse. I borrowed money from the wrong people. I thought if I could just get a little ahead, I could pay you back, make things right. But now they're threatening me and I don't know what to do." Foster felt a surge of anger, but also a deep, aching sadness. He wanted to help her, to protect her, but he also knew that enabling her would only lead to more pain. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. Rachel looked away, tears streaming down her face. "I was ashamed. I thought you'd hate me. I thought you'd turn me away like I did to you." The words hung in the air, heavy with regret. Foster reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I could never hate you, Rachel. But I can't fix your life for you. You have to want to change." She nodded, her grip tightening. "I do, Dad. I really do. I'll go to counseling. I'll get a job. I need a chance." Foster studied her face, searching for the truth. He saw fear but also hope, a flicker of the daughter he'd loved before the world had hardened her. "I'll help you," he said finally, "but there will be conditions. No more lies. No more stealing. And you have to make amends, not just to me but to yourself." Rachel nodded, relief and gratitude flooding her face. As they left the hotel together, Foster felt a cautious hope take root. The road ahead would be hard, but for the first time it felt possible. Yet as they stepped into the rain, Rachel hesitated, her voice trembling. "Dad, there's something else. Someone's been following me. I think they know about the money." The words sent a chill down Foster's spine. The past, it seemed, was not done with them yet. The city's spring rain turned the streets to rivers, and Foster felt the old tension return as he and Rachel hurried from the hotel to Carter's office, their eyes scanning every passing face. Rachel's confession about being followed had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. He'd spent so long surviving on the edge, first in his car, then in the cold shadow of his daughter's betrayal, that the idea of being hunted for his newfound fortune felt both surreal and terrifying. Carter listened intently as Rachel described the man who'd been watching her. Tall, heavy-set, always in a dark coat, always just out of reach. "He knows where I live, Dad. He left a note on my door. It just said, 'We know about the money. Pay up or else.'" Foster's hands clenched into fists, anger and fear warring in his chest. Carter was calm but decisive. "We'll get you both protection. I'll call the police and the bank. We'll flag your accounts, set up alerts, and move you to a safer hotel under a different name." The next days were a blur of security briefings, new passwords, and police interviews. Foster watched Rachel closely, searching for signs that she was slipping back into old habits. But she surprised him. She kept her head down, went to counseling, and even started working part-time at the shelter where Foster volunteered. Still, the sense of being watched never left them. One night, as Foster walked back to the hotel from the corner store, he caught a glimpse of a man in a dark coat standing beneath a street lamp, his face hidden in shadow. Foster's heart pounded as he ducked into a side alley, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. He called Carter, who arrived within minutes, his car headlights cutting through the darkness. "Get in," Carter said, his voice tight. "We're not taking any chances." Back at the hotel, the police reviewed the security footage and confirmed that the man had been seen near Rachel's apartment as well. "He's connected to the loan sharks," the detective said. "We're working on it, but you need to stay vigilant." Foster nodded, his resolve hardening. He realized that protecting Rachel, and himself, would mean more than just locking doors and changing passwords. It would mean facing the consequences of the past, the debts and dangers that had followed them into this new life. He sat with Rachel that night, the city lights flickering outside the window, and told her the truth. "We can't run from this, Rachel. We have to face it together. No more secrets. No more lies." She nodded, tears in her eyes, and for the first time, Foster believed her. The next morning, they met with Carter and the police, laying out a plan to confront the loan sharks and put an end to the threats once and for all. As they left the meeting, Foster felt a strange sense of calm. The shadows were closing in, but he was no longer alone. He had his daughter, his friends, and a second chance he refused to waste. The storm was far from over, but for the first time, Foster felt ready to fight. Not just for his fortune, but for the family he was determined to rebuild. The plan came together in Carter's office, the air thick with tension as Foster, Rachel, and the detective mapped out every detail. They would use the promise of a payoff to lure the loan sharks into the open, with police waiting nearby to catch them in the act. Foster's hands shook as he signed the paperwork authorizing a controlled withdrawal, the memory of cold nights in his car and the echo of Rachel's desperate apology fueling his resolve. Rachel was pale but determined, her eyes never leaving Foster's as she promised, "I won't let you down again, Dad." The day of the meeting dawned gray and heavy, the city's usual bustle muted by the threat of rain. Foster and Rachel arrived at the designated cafe, a nondescript place near the train station, their nerves raw as they waited for the men who had haunted Rachel's nightmares. The first arrived alone, his dark coat slick with rain, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Foster. "You got the money?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. Foster nodded, sliding a briefcase across the table, his heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear the man's next words. "You're smarter than I thought, old man. Most people just run." Rachel sat beside Foster, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her fear masked by a calm she didn't feel. The second man entered, larger and meaner, his presence filling the small cafe with a sense of danger. He took the briefcase, opened it, and grinned. "Looks like we're done here." But before he could stand, the detective and two officers appeared, their badges flashing. "Police. Hands where we can see them." The men froze, shock and fury twisting their faces as they were cuffed and read their rights. The cafe erupted in chaos, customers ducking for cover, but Foster and Rachel sat still, the adrenaline leaving them shaky and breathless. The detective nodded at Foster, his eyes full of respect. "You did good, Mr. Williams. You both did." As the police led the men away, Rachel broke down, sobbing into Foster's shoulder. "It's over, Dad. It's finally over." Foster held her close, his own tears falling as the weight of fear and guilt lifted from his chest. The confrontation had been terrifying, but it had also been cleansing, a final reckoning with the shadows of their past. As they left the cafe, the rain had stopped, the city washed clean by the storm. Foster looked at Rachel, her face streaked with tears but shining with hope, and realized that the true victory was not in the money or the arrest, but in the courage they had found in each other. The worst had happened, but they had survived. And in that survival, Foster discovered a strength he never knew he had. A strength born not of wealth, but of love, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his daughter. The days after the arrest felt like waking from a long, fevered dream. Foster's name was suddenly everywhere. On the news, in the local paper, whispered about in the grocery store, and at the shelter where he still volunteered. "Homeless man outsmarts crime ring, inherits $60 million. The headlines blared, and strangers stopped him on the street to shake his hand or ask for advice. But for Foster, the real story was quieter, unfolding in the small moments of his new life. The way the hotel staff now greeted him with genuine warmth, the way Rachel lingered at the breakfast table, her eyes searching his face for forgiveness, the way Linda's laughter, so long absent, began to fill their home again. Carter, ever the steady advisor, helped Foster navigate the flood of requests and offers that came with sudden wealth. "You can do anything you want now, Foster," he said one afternoon, sliding a stack of proposals across the desk. "The question is, what do you want?" Foster stared at the papers, his mind drifting back to the cold nights in his car, the sting of Rachel's words, the kindness of strangers who had given him coffee, a blanket, a moment of dignity. He realized that money, for all its power, could not buy back the years he'd lost or erase the scars of betrayal. But it could be used to build something new. He decided to fund a new shelter, one that would offer not just beds and meals, but counseling, job training, and a sense of community for people like him. People who had been cast aside but who still had so much to give. He set up scholarships in his late wife's name, donated to the food bank, and quietly paid off the medical debts of several families he'd met at the shelter. Through it all, Rachel watched him, her remorse deepening with every act of generosity. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, she finally spoke the words he'd been waiting to hear. "Dad, I know I don't deserve it, but I want to try again. I want to be your daughter, not because of the money, but because I miss you. I miss us." Foster looked at her, his heart full of pain and hope. "It's not about deserving, Rachel. It's about choosing. I choose to forgive you. But you have to choose to forgive yourself." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time, Foster believed that healing was possible. The choice was his, to hold on to anger, or to open his heart to the possibility of a new beginning. As the sun set over the city, painting the sky in gold and rose, Foster made his decision. He would not let the past define him. He would use his fortune to build a legacy of kindness, resilience, and love. And he would give Rachel, and himself, a second chance at family. The grand opening of the new shelter was a day Foster would never forget. The building, once a crumbling warehouse, now stood bright and welcoming, its walls painted with murals of hope and resilience. Volunteers bustled about, setting out trays of food and arranging beds, while local officials and reporters mingled with the first guests, men and women whose stories echoed Foster's own. Rachel was everywhere, her energy infectious as she greeted newcomers, handed out blankets, and shared her own journey of falling and rising again. Foster watched her with pride, his heart swelling as he realized how far they had both come. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, with Carter giving a short speech about second chances and the power of community. Foster spoke last, his voice steady as he thanked everyone who had helped him turn pain into purpose. "This place isn't just a shelter," he said. "It's proof that no one is ever truly lost, that every life can be rebuilt, no matter how broken." The applause was warm, and for a moment Foster felt a peace he hadn't known in years. But as the crowd began to thin, a man approached the entrance, a stranger in a dark suit, his face unfamiliar but his presence commanding. He introduced himself as Mr. Langley, an attorney from a law firm Foster had never heard of. "Mr. Williams, may I have a word?" Foster nodded, curiosity and caution mingling in his chest. They stepped into a quiet office, where Langley handed Foster a sealed envelope. "This is from your great-uncle's estate. There's one final matter to discuss." Foster opened the envelope, his hands trembling as he read the letter inside. It was a codicil to the will, written in his great-uncle's own hand. "Foster, if you're reading this, it means you've found your way back to yourself. I left you this fortune not just to change your life, but to see what you would do with it. If you've used it to help others, to heal your family, then you've passed the final test. There is one more gift, an additional trust to be used however you see fit. But if you've squandered it or let bitterness rule your heart, the remainder will go to charity." Foster's eyes filled with tears as he realized the depth of his great-uncle's faith in him, the challenge and the blessing wrapped into one. Langley smiled. "You've done well, Mr. Williams. The trust is yours." As Foster returned to the main hall, Rachel met him with a questioning look. He hugged her tightly, whispering, "We did it, kid. We really did." The shelter buzzed with life, laughter, and the promise of new beginnings. Foster knew that the journey wasn't over. There would be setbacks, hard days, and old wounds that might never fully heal. But as he looked around at the faces of those he'd helped, at Rachel's hopeful smile, and at the community they'd built together, he felt a sense of triumph deeper than any fortune. The true inheritance, he realized, was not the money, but the chance to love, to forgive, and to start again. The shelter was quiet in the early morning, sunlight streaming through the windows and painting golden stripes across the polished floors. Foster Williams sat at his desk, a mug of coffee warming his hands, the sounds of gentle laughter and soft footsteps drifting in from the kitchen where Rachel and a few volunteers prepared breakfast. The world outside felt new, as if the city itself had been washed clean by the storms of the past year. Foster was content, his heart full with the knowledge that he had built something lasting. Not just a shelter, but a home for those who had nowhere else to go, a place where hope was more than a word. As he sorted through the morning's mail, his fingers paused on a small, cream-colored envelope, the handwriting on the front instantly familiar. It was from his great-uncle's attorney, Mr. Langley, but the return address was different. This one was marked personal. Foster opened it carefully, unfolding a single sheet of paper. The letter was dated years before, written in a shaky but determined hand. Foster, if you are reading this, it means you have survived the worst and found your way back to yourself. I always believed you had a strength you didn't see, a kindness that would outlast any hardship. The money was never the real gift. The real inheritance is the courage to forgive, to love, and to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. If you have done that, then you have honored our family in the only way that matters. Use what you have to lift others, to heal, to hope. That is the legacy I leave you. Foster's eyes filled with tears as he read the words, the weight of his great-uncle's faith settling over him like a blessing. He looked up as Rachel entered, her face bright with the promise of a new day. "What's that, Dad?" she asked, her voice gentle. Foster smiled, folding the letter and tucking it into his pocket. "Just a reminder that we're exactly where we're meant to be." They walked together into the dining hall, where the first guests were gathering, their faces alight with gratitude and the fragile hope of a second chance. Foster greeted each one by name, his heart swelling with pride as he watched Rachel move among them, her laughter ringing out like music. The pain of the past was still there, a scar that would never fully fade, but it no longer defined him. Instead, Foster chose to remember the lessons learned, that dignity is worth fighting for, that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, and that family at its best is a place where even the deepest wounds can be healed. As the sun climbed higher and the shelter filled with life, Foster stood at the window watching the world go by, and felt a peace deeper than any he had ever known. The journey had been long and hard, but in the end he had found what he was searching for, not in the fortune he inherited, but in the love he rebuilt, the hope he inspired, and the legacy he would leave behind. And as the day unfolded, bright and full of promise, Foster knew that whatever tomorrow brought, he was ready.